An effective accessibility statement comes down to five components. One, you state a commitment to accessibility. Two, you provide a means of support. Three, and similarly, you provide a means for feedback. Four, you talk about the practical use of your digital offering in terms of accessibility. And five, you provide some type of demonstration of your commitment. So, actual showing that you actually are committed rather than just stating it. So, let's get into this further, but let's also talk about accessibility statement versus policy. So it's okay to have an accessibility policy as the link to your website. There's nothing wrong with that. But here's where I see them differing. A policy is more for internal use. A statement is for the for public facing use. So with a policy for larger entities, it's going to include things like project plans and objectives, implementation methodology, procedures and processes outlines, target date specifications, training parameters, individuals and departments that are responsible, penalties, if any, review, if any, and maintenance. So when we're talking about policy, it's more for the internal workings. Of course, it includes a commitment, but it includes much more. It's like the carrying out of that commitment. And so that's where I see a policy being something that you would keep internally because a lot of those details aren't necessary for public and you might not want them public. And moreover, the public doesn't really want them. They want the end result of them. And that's where we get into the accessibility statement. So the accessibility statement is really a condensing of your policy to include the information that is pertinent, that is relevant to your audience. So going back to those five components of an accessibility statement, the first thing is the way I like to start off accessibility statements with stating that commitment. It doesn't have to be a long statement. It doesn't have to be several paragraphs long. It can be if you want it to be, but I like to keep it an opening paragraph that's strong, firm, and just states what my accessibility commitment is. Um, and then after that, I like to immediately provide a means to access support and or provide feedback. And that's really, really important to me because it was a point of emphasis of the Department of Justice and their mandates within private action, within settlements with private companies that they instituted actions against. So I look to the DOJ with all of my best practices. That the DOJ, the Department of Justice has been my guide. So what the Department of Justice says is likely to be law in the future. In the meantime, while that works out, while we have a lot of gray area, I continually go back to the Department of Justice and what they have required in settlements and private enforcement actions against private entities. So that's what I've looked to. That's where I think that's where you can find best practices for Title III, Title III compliance, whether it comes down to websites, mobile apps, etc. If you look to those DOJ private enforcement actions, that's where you will find the best information. So if you if you read the ADA book written by me, that's where my material comes from. I just convey it and I just distill it and convey it and make sure it's practically usable that you can immediately take action items from. So for in this instance, we're talking about accessibility statements, and that's why I think that providing a means of support and feedback, multiple means of at that is very, very important. And then so we're getting into and then so next practical usage. So um, if there are any, if you know of any difficulties with a particular browser, for example, Microsoft browsers typically behave different than the main browsers such as Google Chrome, Safari, and Firefox. So if you know of any practical difficulties where it's like you can't reconcile it with one or the other, generally you want to make sure that your website is able to be used in as many browsers as possible. But sometimes, for whatever reason, the browsers don't always sync with behavior. So if you know of that, then that would be something to include. And that's actually getting to the purpose of the accessibility statement to provide relevant information, and then also a means to get support if it is needed. So you want to have that relevant information, and have that there. So extending upon that, if you know of any areas of your website where there will be a technological limit, then you'll want to speak to those. So I actually thought of the example of Coinbase before this. So not all of Coinbase's live graphs are going to be, you're not going to be able to convey all of that information in an effective manner. And it's really not even necessary because a lot of it is just noise, a lot of it is just market movements going on. But that would be a great example of something where you would want to say, we use live charts. There are constant movements of trades going back and forth. If and stating, if you want to access that information or be aware of those different changes or the different pricing changes, then here's what you'll need to do, et cetera, et cetera. So outlining that so that making sure that nobody wastes their time is very, very important because if you have something on a component or an element on your website where it's not accessible, you don't want someone to waste their time going through it when they might not be able to use it. So, and primarily here, we're going to be speaking with assistive technology and how different components of the website will be compatible or not compatible with assistive technology, and just letting people know ahead of time. And I think that's a really helpful thing, and that's why one of the reasons why it's so great to have an accessibility statement is so if somebody does notice something or they do come upon a trouble spot, then they can go onto the accessibility statement and find out practically, okay, how do I navigate through this, or where do I access this content, etc. So practical use is very important. Of course, it's something that is nuanced because you also don't want to invite litigation with what you say. So there's some nuance there, and it really depends on how you want to write your accessibility statement. And that just gets into customization, which is a great point because it's very, very important that you, with your accessibility statement, it is custom to you as an individual, as a company, as an organization. You want to make sure that you are in your statement, you are reflecting your commitment and what you have done, and not saying things that you haven't done. That's very, very important, especially when you're looking at templates. Now, there are a number of templates out there, including my own, but you want to make sure that even if you do use a template, you are still customizing it and making sure that it is accurate for you. And that the last component is really demonstrating your commitment to accessibility. So part of that demonstration just comes through in how thorough and how serious you take your accessibility statement. If you just write a few paragraphs, that's more just trying to check a box. But if you are thorough in your accessibility statement, you make sure to include a number of considerations, then that reflects well upon you when you do that. And then further, when you talk about some of the things you have done or some of the investments you have made, it could be training, it could be hiring a consultant, it could be conducting an audit, whatever the case may be, your ongoing maintenance. Um, Accessibility statements aren't they're not one and the same. They don't have, yours can be different. You can include information that other people don't. The most important part is that you are relaying your commitment to accessibility. You are making a genuine effort. You are inviting feedback. You are offering support, and you are demonstrating that you are taking this seriously, and it is not something you're doing. Just posting an accessibility statement of itself doesn't do a lot. It's very minimal. Although some people don't even have that. Some large companies don't even have an accessibility statement. I think it's actually um, more practically useful than a privacy policy. Um, so I know that I go and look at accessibility statements to gauge how serious um, an entity is about accessibility. They're extremely important. And they're also practically useful. So that is why you want to have one. Those are some of the those are I've talked about the different primary components of an accessibility statement, and then from there you start filling in the details. if you would like to look at my accessibility template, it is completely free and it is on accessible.org.